Our first workshop, which is going to last for about 50 minutes with a 10 minutes Q&A at the end, is facilitated by Dr. Tanya Manning-Lewis and Dr. Frederic Fovet. Sorry, I'm lashing out on the French accent today. and the workshop is about liberatory pedagogy. Yes, please make fun. It's also good. Where UDL meets anti-racism. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Monique. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Tanya Manning-Lewis, and as Monique introduced, I'm at the University, Thompson Rivers University, and this morning, Frederic and I will be leading this workshop. I want to start by acknowledging that we are located on the unceded territory of the Secwepemc within Secwepemc Hulu. In Kamloops, British Columbia. If you've never been to British Columbia, it's an amazing place. You should definitely take a trip there. You have. It is so beautiful. It took me a while to get used to it because I'm from Vancouver Island and it's a lot warmer in Vancouver Island. But as we are doing this workshop on liberatory pedagogies, and this morning one of our speakers mentioned that we need to think about who is missing from the conversation. And I want to connect that to the land on which we are working and the kind of work we're doing. I'm thinking about how we are engaging and involving those people who are often missing from the conversation when we talk about UDL. And it's fascinating because Frederic and I, as the title suggests, like where it meets, it's where Frederic and I met as colleagues at Thompson Rivers University, where I am involved quite a bit in anti-racism work, while Frederic is deeply embedded in UDL work and is finding ways to bring those two worlds together. And so we're really looking forward today as we think about the people who are missing and how we engage in the work we do and the places in which we do this work. I want us to remember that we honor those who came before us and the kind of work and make sure we're serving them in the work that we're doing as well.
Thanks. And we wanted also to take the time to do an acknowledgement of country. And we'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to Gadigal people in the Eora Nation, the traditional owners and custodian of the land on which the University of Sydney has been built and which were taken from them without consent, treaty, or compensation. And we pay respect to elders past and present. And we'll be coming back to questions originated within the workshop as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me clearly. I do have a teacher voice, so I'm going to also make use of it. So what are the objectives of this workshop? First and foremost, we want to examine the race-neutral tendencies that is dominant in UDL discourse. And this is conversation Frederic and I have been having for the last year and a half. We want to reflect on the tensions and challenges that exist in merging UDL with anti-racist praxis. We also want to look at some strategies that we can develop within this group, within this workshop, and come up with some very practical collective problem solving solutions that we can use for this. And we're hoping that is going to be a very engaging session. We're not going to talk a lot. And if you're at a table by yourself, now might be a good time to make sure you're at a table with others, because we're hoping to have that ongoing dialogue throughout the workshop itself. We're gonna start a little by sharing why this work. As I mentioned earlier, I have been engaged in anti-racism work for the last, it has always been a part of my practice. This year is my 23rd year teaching. So I've been teaching for a while and I've been in the post-secondary system for about 11 years. And yes, my face, I get it from my students all the time. I've been in the post-secondary system for the last 11 years, but in the last 6 or 7 years, I would say my focus has really shifted in terms of the work I do. I have a background in language education and linguistics, but after moving to Canada in 2016, and my kids started school in 2019, I recognized that there are a lot of issues within the system that's not being addressed. And so I found myself start doing a little bit more around EDI and anti-racism work. And that has shifted quite a bit in the last couple of years as I'm focusing more on that. So I do a lot of workshops with teachers. I work with parent and teacher groups. And within my faculty, I run an anti-racism pedagogy community of practice. And as I mentioned, Frederic is right next to me and he does a lot of work, but in UDL. And while UDL has been a part of my practice itself, I don't know if I've necessarily looked at it in a more focused and intentional way within my practice. And so I appreciate the conversations that I've been having with Frederic for the last 2 years, and we have been talking quite a bit about what's missing in UDL and what's missing also in my field, in EDA and anti-racism work. Because as scholars who are engaged in that work, racialized scholars, often we focus on race and we don't necessarily take up disability studies, accessibility, and things like that in the same way. So there are some short sights on our part, as well as there are when you look at UDL and who are the folks who are missing from the conversation. And we were gonna make the joke from yesterday when he said to me, you're gonna come to the conference, you probably will be the only Black person at the conference. So we laughed a little about it. And then I walked into the room, I'm like, oh, you're not joking. It's actually not a joke. And so we had a good laugh about that. That is not a joke, but it's real for us to have this conversation again. Who is missing? Why are we missing? How do we engage? And how do we make sure we're bringing those people into the fold who wouldn't necessarily engage in UDL work in the same way?
Thanks, Tanya. I'm going to the camera so they can see me on Zoom as well. I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit. But before that, just to break the ice, we're starting to break the ice. This should be really informal. This is also a lived narrative, right? Because we started at the same university on the same day, and we have offices next to each other. And so that lived experience of weaving these experiences is something that we do every day. And we're going to encourage you to also find colleagues that you can start doing that, right? Because we are very siloed in this field, and it's up to us through our interactions every day to break the silos. You know, in the end, it took to, you know, I said to Tanya, come to Australia, come to this conference. And I think that's what it takes, right? That we invite people into these spaces, and vice versa, that we visit other spaces than ours as well. So my interest in anti-racism, sort of education within UDL, I did 4 years as head of accessibility at McGill, a very large campus, 40,000 students, just while I was doing my PhD. And as I left there, I immediately went into the faculty role, teaching a fully international classroom in a very small rural university in Eastern Canada. And so it was really seamless to take everything I'd learned about UDL and transfer it to an international classroom, not about impairment, but just about linguistic and cultural diversity. And right away, the conversation from the students, as we were talking about inclusion and accessibility and what supported them in UDL, was about the racism that they've met and they encountered in the community. I'm now in another university, but still teaching fully international classroom, and so this experience daily, right? It's really hard to think about accessibility, about UDL, without actually thinking about all the rest of the experiences that the students are having. So that's the journey on which we're going to invite you today.
Thank you. All is well?
Sorry, we just wanted to move the captions a little bit.
Oh, thank you. So as we're going to begin our session today, Frederic is going to walk us a little bit through some of the terminology we're going to use in this session. And I appreciate that he has a certain understanding of this context. And so he wants to share a little bit about that before we begin.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's an understanding of this context, but it's just wanted to share with you the experiences I had presenting about such things in different conferences in different countries, and we've got to be conscious and aware of our geopolitical context and the terminologies we use, etc. So we wanted to highlight the fact that when we talk about anti-racism education in North America, we're very, very focused on the leftovers of slavery and how slavery affects North American society. Now, obviously, in a New Zealand context or an Australian context, you probably also include in there indigeneity, right? And actually looking at race as a split between the settlers and between indigenous people. In Canada, we tend to even dissect that further and say, well, we've got anti-racism, we've got indigenization, and then we've got UDL, right? So it complicates the terminology even further. So it's just something to keep in mind, right? As we use these terms, that these terms have context, and we have to understand what context we use them in. And also when we use scholarship, people might be using different terms for different things, right? So just to take that zoom out and understand people sometimes use different concepts.
Thank you for providing that. I appreciate it. So I'm going to ask to start off today with this provocation. A part of it is missing because of the, but what happens when the word that is missing? I'm trying to remember. Pardon me for that. Thank you. Imagine I'm missing my own word, right? It's been a long 2 days and I couldn't sleep last night. So I think I'm on my 3rd day now. What happens when access is defined without race in mind? And that's a question that Frederic and I have been pondering quite a bit in the last couple of weeks, because I because again, because of the work I'm involved in, I draw on the work of Black feminist scholars like Audre Lorde, who speaks about the fact that there is no single lived life or experience, right? We are all living in the intersectional lives. There's no single reality. And so when we think about what happens when access is defined without race in mind, I asked Frederic, how do you do UDL work without thinking about race? And how do you get into spaces where folks are not thinking about that at all? Where do I fit into that conversation? And what about those folks who would want to be involved in it? What are the things we're thinking about? So we have to think about what are the tensions that exist in the field itself when we're thinking about doing this work, because whether we want to acknowledge it or not, our students come into spaces, or even if you're working in services, accessibility services, our students come to us as intersectional human beings. They're going to be people who may be Black, brown, indigenous, people with disability, whether it's visible or invisible, people who have language needs. There are going to be a lot of things that they come into the spaces with. Do we consider any of these? And we talk about this morning about UDL 3.0 and looking at making sure we're checking our biases and we're being very inclusive in our practices. And again, it goes back to who are the people are we referring to? Who are the people who are leading these services? Who are the people who are missing? How do you engage with people who are living those intersectional lives if you're not considering the intersectionality of their experiences, right? So we have to think about the tensions. We have to think about the fear of addressing race under the guise of neutrality. And I lead an anti-racism pedagogy across the curriculum. And we had a good laugh because I would get colleagues who would come in from the sciences and they'll be like, oh, science is very objective, it's neutral. Why do I need to talk about race in my science class? And I would give the exasperated look and then, well, there's nothing that's neutral about science, nothing neutral about any of the fields that you're in. But I think for us, it's easier to see it as neutral, to be objective, to say, I don't see color in anything I do because color complicates what I do and I don't want it to be complicated. So we act under the guise of neutrality because it frees us from dealing with the complexities of the people that we're working with, right? It frees us. And so within that fear is when we need to push past that boundary, because when you engage in anti-racism work, we talk a lot about it. You can either choose comfort or courage. And if you're going to do courage, if you're going to choose comfort in UDL, that means you're going to continue to ignore the intersectionalities of the people we're engaging with, or ignore race completely, right? So we have to think about that. We have to think about instructors' discomfort with this. I usually, when I go into rooms and into sessions, sometimes people roll their eyes at me because I generate discomfort. Not because I'm a uncomfortable person, I'm a lovely human being. I promise you I am. But because of what the kind of conversations we're going to generate in the room, it creates discomfort. And I'll say to my students, you experience discomfort because you're learning. And the same thing goes for UDL and the kind of work we're doing. You have to experience discomfort for us to completely change what is happening, for us to make systemic changes, what university, wherever, whatever level you are, you have to experience discomfort because that is what will move us forward. And institutional resistance is commonplace. But if you start taking that first step, you'll be surprised what will happen when you find, for example, Frederic and I doing this work, how we are moving forward and how we're bringing along our colleagues in this work as well. I feel like it's very, very important that we're doing that.
So Tanya had a provocation from the faculty side. I wear both hats because I've been accessibility manager and then I'm also faculty. So before we switch to my provocation as far as accessibility is concerned, I want to go back to the 3.0, right? And I'm going to give you another provocation there. All the frustrations I felt in the last 10 years that was saying, we're doing UDL, oh, we should really think about critical pedagogy. And now we've suddenly said, okay, let's stick it there in 2 points of the guidelines and that will do the trick. It will not do the trick. UDL has to really get involved in very serious sort of consideration of how we weave these discourses together. And it's not by adding two sections on the guidelines that you're going to do that, right? My provocation is looking at the accessibility side, right? We've looked at the faculty side, but also why has race remained thus far tangibly absent from the UDL discourse? It's, you know, it was a joke with Tanya. I said, come to this conference, but it'll be all white. If you go to the ADCET conference in the States, which are thousands of people, you walk in a room and it completely hits you, right? In a country that is so diverse, there is no diversity in that room. Historically, we have a problem. There's been a dominance of impairment within the UDL discourse, obviously, and disability itself has been very white as a discourse, right? If you don't believe me, go back to look at, Twitter, well, the X now, but that was called Twitter. Look at 2016. A lot of people started using the hashtag disability to white. I used it for 2 months. I have never been as trolled, systematically trolled, as when I use disability to white. So the resistance is there. And we have a lot of denial about the fact that, oh no, we are totally colorblind. We're not colorblind. We have a lot of resistance to intersectionality. And historically, it's not an individual fault, but look around. We are a space that is completely white. And you go to Australia, you go to New Zealand, you go to Canada, you go to the States, it's the same thing. So how do we break that? That's something that we're going to have to discuss today and actually, again, try and provoke your thoughts about how we can do this, each of us in our context, on our campuses.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to start breaking this by starting with a conversation. And you already, I said groups of 3 or 4, but you're going to just remain at your tables. And for those folks who are online, I don't know if we want to just put them into breakout rooms. Yeah. And so we're going to start with start our conversation with some of the pressing questions we came up with as we were grappling ourselves with what's happening in this work. And so at your table, we're going to do the first 2 check-in, and then we do the next 2 sort of a thing, because we've left the workshop time to really have conversations. You don't need to hear myself and Frederic talk too much. And so we want you to be having those conversations and to share with us. And we're mindful that the camera is here, but we're going to try and move around the room a little bit, because it's so hard for me to stand and talk in front when doing a workshop. I feel like it's really, I would like to engage as we are doing this. So I want you to think about the first 2 questions. Where do you see UDL initiatives intersecting with race in your context? And I was made aware that we have a number of folks here who are not necessarily in education.
Yeah, well, I think we've got a right cross-section, yeah, and also
cross-section.
accessibility, faculty.
Whatever your context is. And where does UDL, you think it falls short for racialized learners whose needs or stories are often overlooked when we're having these conversations? And later on, we're going to unpack that a little bit as we do the debrief. So we'll give about 5 to 7 minutes for you to start thinking about that and sharing among each other at your table. Oh, I'm told that I'm touching my mic, so I'm going to try not to. I'm going to keep my arms out, Frederic. I'm going to do that. Because I'm not accustomed to wearing a mic. I'm accustomed to just speaking as loudly as possible to whatever group size I'm teaching. We are going to come back a bit just to unpack a little bit of what we talked about in looking at the first 2 questions. And if there are any questions online or within the room, feel free to ask or share. I wonder what were some of your thoughts as you were looking at, do we want to go back to the questions? That would be really great. As we're looking at the, yes. The first 2, like where you see UDL initiatives intersecting with race in context, and where does it fall short for racialized learners? What were some of the conversations you were having around it? Yes, may I have your name? Lauren. Go ahead, Lauren.
Hi, everyone online. I'm Lauren. So we talked about, for most of our cohort, they are international students from various backgrounds. So for a lot of us, UDL is more culturally based, I guess. So it intersects, well, for me, definitely, that's my main focus, is how do I set up an environment. But let me backtrack. We're talking about international students. They don't just come to a new country with where the language isn't their first language. They move whole cultures and everything is completely different. For me, I'm from New Zealand, and coming here, I was like, what is this place? And we're cousins, essentially. So when you're thinking of UDL in the classroom, it's how do you make your classroom culturally safe? How do you get students mingling, but also feel safe to still connect with the people from their same background? We talked about a lot, but we felt like they very, very much intersect in our context.
I appreciate the conversation, because it was a similar conversation at this table as well. And how do we look at this, culture or race? And I said, race. Culture is a safer option Because when we say, oh, we are trying to meet them in terms of understanding their cultural backgrounds and creating safe spaces, I think we're choosing the safer option by not speaking about race, because they're two distinctly different things, right? For example, I shared with the group, when we talk about international students and we talk about, well, we have people who are coming in from different cultural backgrounds, but when we look at the folks who are having the experiences that we're referencing, there is not the same thing. We're talking about people who are Black and brown, how we tend to see and treat them differently, because we get international students from Australia, New Zealand, Finland, Sweden, you name it. Are they having the same experiences?
Well, yeah, we talked about that too, but I
Right.
didn't have enough time. But I did want to say something, just a side note, when looking around, and sorry, you said everyone here is white. I'm not. So I felt that a little bit like, just because my skin's a bit paler, I'm Indigenous to New Zealand. So I feel like that was a bit of a generalization as well.
Oh, it was just a joke we were
yeah,
making.
I know, but,
We do know that there are other folks who are non-white here. We're just
Yeah.
making a joke about that. Yes.
Thanks. So yeah, that was something we talked about as well. And then not when we're talking about race and UDL, not making generalizations to really learn about the individual aspects of. We literally said the international students, they're not just international, we learn about them as
Yes.
individuals as well.
I appreciate that. And that's why I said we look at that more so than just seeing it in a general way as culture, because culture again becomes sort of a guise for not really tackling some of the real things that might be and real experiences. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I eavesdropped on that table. There was also something really interesting that was discussed about how when the students have the opportunity to come together and share, in amongst themselves in that group that is homogeneous to them, they are much more free about what they want to say about, how hard the UDL space can be or how hard accessible it can be. So let's think about that too, right? The fact that we put maybe people in spaces where they become cautious of not talking if they're not around other folks who have similarly the experience, etc. And maybe that's something that's missing as well.
And that's something that's also come up a little bit later. All right, we're going to look at the last two questions, and because in the interest of time, we really do want. Oh, there was a question. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm Maya from TAFE New South Wales. We didn't actually get to discuss this, but in this context, like systemically, there's a huge number of students blocked from even getting in the door on a cultural basis. And that comes from the actual process because of the documentation that you have to provide.
Yeah.
So, for example, I work in a disability area, and they say, you have to have this documentation. And when people come in with it in another language, that's perfectly acceptable. So it would be accepted by an embassy, but hey, you can't use it to enroll in a course
Right.
like really? That you can drive across a border, but you can't use this documentation to have access to education in Australia. So that's one of the major blockages and even getting to this point. So people are running without support the whole time. And I find I am constantly assisting people. This is how to lose your job at a conference. I am constantly assisting people off the books for this reason. And we shouldn't be in that position. And so that systemically very much needs to change.
Yes, I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. We are going to look at the last two, like what are the tensions you're witnessing or experiencing when it comes to this, and what questions or commitments? I was going to ask, where are you on this journey? But I think if you have time, we could explore. Oh, there are other questions. Oh.
There's one idea.
Hi, I'm Mariana from New South Wales Uni.
I don't think it's on.
Can you hear me? Yes? Yeah. Just going to the second last question, I think, there's a lot of opportunities with UDL to integrate race and discussions of equality in Australia. I think one of the issues is that discussions around race in Australia are still very much missing, right?
Mhm.
And people of color was,
Mhm.
you know, hi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Um, people of color are kind of like missing from these discussions. And again, we go back to discussing international students, which are super important. I was an international student, but we kind of like are afraid of talking about indigenous people and indigenous people missing from this discussion here right now. So I see amazing opportunities, but I see the students being willing to discuss their bias, their privilege, talking about these things very, very candidly in the classroom. But I see a little bit of like challenges discussing race and privilege
Yes,
with people in higher levels of influence.
absolutely.
Yeah, and again, like I identify as a person of color. So, color is very diverse and experiences, are very diverse. So I see that as kind of like the next thing that we have to negotiate. But yeah, we're learning a lot from people in the Americas because here the discussion hasn't been happening very like at this level. Thank you.
And you bring up an important point that when we talk about this, we
Thank you.
find ourselves kind of immediately going to international students, and so that becomes kind of the thing we talk about. But our domestic students are just as diverse, right? And just to make a point that when we talk about being in this room, if you notice, I did not say only person of color. He said you might be the only Black person in the room. So there is a difference in that. Just want to make that clear, because so that we don't offend anyone in terms of the joke, because we do understand that in this room, we're going to find people from diverse backgrounds as well and identities. But when we're looking at this work, that we also consider the needs of our students who are non-international. And again, it goes back to the fact that we are uncomfortable with these conversations and they generate tensions. And fortunately, I am comfortable with tension now, because we need to experience that for us to really dig into these things. And so it leads to the question, what are the tensions you're witnessing or experiencing? We may not have time to do the 5 to 7 minute conversation, but if you want to openly share, that might be good, yeah? Because in the interest of time, like what are the tensions? Because usually when you do workshops, you need like 2 hours to unpack, 3 hours to unpack all these things. But go ahead, Fred.
I did want to, oops. Is it on? I did want to address what you were saying and saying we look to the Americas. I think we've got to be careful of that too. If we're in Canada, people say, oh, we don't have racial issues here. Look what they do in the States, right? It's very easy to look at another nation and say, oh, they deal with it better here, or we deal better here. In the end, I think we deal badly everywhere. Right. And that's the general global state at the moment. So you shouldn't pat the country on the back. Because in Canada, we have this discussion often. We say, oh, we have issues with indigeneity, but we don't have issues with race. Yeah, go and talk to, a Black African Canadian immigrant to Toronto, and they'll tell you what it's like to be in the education system.
They don't even have to be an immigrant, just someone who was born and raised there, and they'll tell you that has been a problem for them.
Fighting.
Hi, my name's Samantha, friends on Zoom. Something that came up in our group that we've put on the Padlet that I think points to this, what tensions are you witnessing? There's a real sensitivity amongst people to view themselves and tie their identity to not being racist. So it's not so much that they're like, well, it is very much being like, I am colorblind, and they don't want to get into uncomfortable conversations. It's also a sense, and I find this working in this field where people are talking about disability, and I work in a lot of like queer spaces as well, where a lot of white queer people are very much like, oh, I'm very proactive about things and I'm distinctly not racist. But they are, in many ways, I wouldn't say anti-racist. And that's perhaps where we're getting a bit of that tension in UDLs. People don't want to come across as, they rather not talk about it at all to make sure that they don't get called racist, because that's more important to them than actually not being racist. Yeah.
I could unpack so much about that, but in the interest of time, I'll just say, read Kendi's work, How to Be an Anti-Racist, because he tackles that very thing about how quickly people want to make sure they're not in any way connected to that, and forgetting that anti-racist is a verb. You have to look at it as a verb and not a noun. It's actionable things that you're doing, but we can't unpack that today.
I was just can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Leslie, for the people who are online. I'm just thinking most universities in Australia seem to have a unit that is specifically for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander support, encouragement. I'm not sure exactly what they do. But I'm just wondering if the people working in UDL, working in learning design, are engaging with that unit, because they kind of would be a really good place to start to make sure that we are including those learners from those backgrounds. It was kind of a comment more than, or a question really for people here.
You can probably address that.
Yes.
And I can't talk for the Australian experience, but I can talk from my 4 years when I was in Canada working in McGill. And it can come down to simple things like saying, you know, oh, First Nations students have to come here to get their assessment and to actually get access to services. And that can be even, you know, culturally and totally, you know, a complete barrier. And then we had to say, we're going to provide accessibility services in First Nations house, First Peoples house. And that's going to be in a circle format, and people will actually be able to do that in that environment. So if we want to do that and create that connection, we're going to have to work really hard to get out of our spaces again and actually go and meet these folks where they are, feeling congenial and safe, and not just say, oh, they have just come to us. I'll talk later because we have a case study. We're going to engage you now with a case study, and we'll get you to really talk in terms of vignettes. But, you know, at one point in Canada, I was asked to be an external for a disability service in a famous university, and I was given access to students. And it's actually heartbreaking to hear students say, you know, I turn up to get an assessment, I don't have documentation. And I get frustrated and I get told, oh, not another angry Black person in accessibility services. So, you know, is it hospitable? Is it even welcoming, right? The access that we have in those front positions and students go to those positions, and race plays into it. But we'll engage you in the case study and we'll have a chance to come back to that.
You have the clicker?
Nope.
Did we lose the clicker?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll go to the case study and we can do a bit of a debrief with that. Okay, so for this case study, because we really wanted to leave enough time for this, we're a little behind, but we'll still make it work. For this case study, we wanted to take some time to explore one of the case studies. We have 3 scenarios, and we looked at what are some of the real experiences we might have with racialized folks seeking support or services, and give you some time to discuss that at your table, and there'll be some reflection questions that you'll have, and then we'll have like a Padlet. The code is there for the case studies. Choose whichever one you want, and we'll have a Padlet for you to share some of your thoughts on that, so that can be more ongoing post the workshop, because we might run out of time for the workshop itself.
And you will see from vignette, we've tried to really scan the room, and you have vignettes that are more focused on the faculty and the teaching side. Some are more focused on accessibility services side. So we'll let your table decide what you prefer to be focusing on.
Oh, that's not good. The QR code not allowing access.
Okay, we'll get creative.
Okay. Okay. We can also just bring up we can bring up the Word document. Oh, and I changed it last night for that very reason, but I guess that's still.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Could you bring up the Word document?
You know, I just tried accessing it and
You access it?
is it the Padlet or the Word?
No, we're looking for the
Word document. The Word document.
the case studies,
Yeah.
right? And the Word document doesn't come out.
Okay.
So that's the Padlet. That's the Padlet. Ooh. Ew. Yeah. Oh, it's in your email. And so they did not, okay. Did you see your folder? And so the person online can't see it?
They have it.
Oh, online has it, but in the room doesn't. Ooh, okay.
Do you have it on paper?
I have one copy on paper we could read. We could read and
You
then,
can share.
well, that's just not.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, Dion?
Sorry, because we're teachers, well, I am a teacher and we have to find ways to improvise. I generated my QR code before in another country and for some reason it is not opening. And so we are going to improvise. Online they can see it, but you can't, and there isn't no option. Why don't we read what it says as quickly as we can, and then later on we'll make it available to you. Can we do that? Okay.
It's the bare bones of a vignette anyway. You
Yes.
can work with it, right?
Just work with a bare bones. So the first case study we have a mid-sized university recently adopted a campus-wide universal UDL initiative aimed at increasing equity in academic engagement. One of the core strategies includes offering all students access to advanced speech-to-text software designed to support learners with diverse needs, including those with learning disabilities. Learning disabilities or difficulties with writing due to anxiety or neurodivergence. The accessibility service team work in collaboration with faculty and IT to integrate the tool across learning platforms and promote its benefits through workshops and orientation sessions. Despite these efforts, staff begin to notice that uptake among racialized students, particularly international students and students who speak with regional or non-dominant English accents, is significantly lower. In a student support meeting, one advisor checks in with a student named Amir, a multilingual engineering student who identifies as South Asian and has a diagnosed learning disability. He explained that he stopped using the tool because it often fails to accurately recognize his accents, and it takes more time correcting it than just writing it out. He also feels awkward using it in a class where people treat him like he doesn't belong, or he doesn't feel like he needs to be there, or is someone who needs extra help. And so we talk about another student in the program expressed that using the app in public draws unwanted attention for them, and it makes them feel different. So the question we have is, how does the fear of stigma or being perceived as needing help might affect racialized students' use of different forms of accommodations? Did I go too fast? No? Good?
That's one option.
That's one. And what can you do to create a stronger sense of psychological safety for students? And Frederic is going to read a second case study. Thank God I printed. Okay, maybe this one is short. We do one
Okay, I'll
more.
do a very quick one.
We do one more.
Julian is a second-year undergraduate student majoring in psychology in a mid-sized urban university. He's Black, a first-generation college student, has recently been diagnosed with ADHD. Jalen has been referred to university's accessibility services after struggling with time management, staying focused, and maintaining academic performance. The Accessibility Service Office promotes a universal design for learning approach, encouraging proactive, flexible, inclusive design across campus. The office has been praised for modernizing its intake processes and shifting away from rigid accommodation list towards a more holistic support. But Jaden's experience doesn't feel holistic at all. When Jaden arrives for the first intake appointment, he's asked to submit extensive documentation, complete several forms outlining his diagnosis and challenges. Some of the questions feel invasive. He wants the why. After already submitting a letter from his clinician, he's being asked, describe how your ADHD impacts your daily academic functioning. He tries to explain his challenges, how his challenges are made worse by the fact that as a Black student, he often doesn't feel safe asking for help. In his first year, an instructor accused him of looking for an easy way out. I think you've got enough there to work on, right? So let's choose one of these two formats. And
So half the room could do one and the other half of the room could do two. Case one, and then the other half could do case two. And we have about 5 minutes. So,
it's always the same.
so bad time management. They're having the whole conversation.
Good.
Oh,
They've been having the documents.
oh, because they have all of that.
Most people
Okay.
have there.
Yes, I shared the document that you sent me with the person online. So like, yeah, that's easier to share.
Yes,
The chat.
yes,
Should have done the same.
And then
yes.
there was the QR code. Like, oh, it'd be fun.
Oh, I know. And I changed the QR code because it wasn't opening. And last night I was like, let's
Yeah,
do
yeah,
that
that's
again.
That's the one.
That's why I
that's what
resent
told
it.
me.
They still don't know.
And it still doesn't work. I don't know. Oh,
Something weird.
yeah. I don't know. That's okay.
Will you be using the Padlet for this? Or
Well,
discussing one?
we can just discuss, and they can
Just
and they
have
can write on the.
Because they have
pad.
access to the slides, right?
Yes,
What they could do.
yes, yes, and
I think there's never enough.
yeah, and I
We had a
do.
question though, which was an interesting one, right? So how often is the word race mentioned on the UDL framework? Is it mentioned at all?
I was going through it, and I think I saw it once. Yeah. Yes, I think when I was looking at it, I saw it. Oh, my mic.
When you get in 3.0 in the third day,
Mic off.
I'm not even sure that it is mentioned, to be honest.
No.
There's also a lot to think about, because if you look at the checklist 3.0,
It's a diverse, not race. That's true.
and a simple exercise too is like, think about critical pedagogy and student agency and voice. If you look at the 3.0, it's actually all action verbs that are instructor-led. The instructor will do this, instructor-led is nothing about actual student agency and student voice. And that you got a problem, right? It's like,
And yeah,
how can you talk about diversity, but it's all instructor-led?
yeah, and checking it. So that's why last night I was thinking about myself, like, how do you move this for, like, you're talking about racism, like, representatively of race. It's like a good time to bring some of this up.
But you've left 5 minutes to questions, right? And then it's questions. About 5 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
So 4 minutes, we let them talk, and then we do 5 minutes questions.
Yeah, so they
I
take
like
about
to-
a minute.
I told him 2 activities go, we don't have time, but yet we get to 2 activities. It's kind of the kind of conversation now.
Workshops should be an hour.
It's a bit
It's hard when you get,
hard to,
when you get engagement. So
yes, yes, it does.
Elizabeth says that when the breakout groups have their mics up, there's a lot of discussion happening. So the online space is getting.
it's working really well.
Yes.
Okay, well,
Yes.
They're apparently-
Yes,
They
you
have
can see
to-
the
yeah.
breakout
Yes, they
groups,
can
they've got their
see.
Mics off, they're chatting.
yes. It's good.
On, sorry.
It's
It's
good.
good. Mics on.
When you said.
Their mics on, sorry. My brain is.
We will find a way, we'll share it out after so people can get that. You can like maybe share it to the.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we had at that time.
Yeah, and then they can have access to
Yeah.
everything.
Okay,
Good.
okay. Debrief then, Frederic.
You ready? One more? A little
We
more?
can have like at least 1 minute.
Yeah.
And that's because the breakout room is closed in 60 seconds, which
Okay.
will be in 30. So
We can tell them 1 minute.
so I'm gonna
Yeah.
tell
So let's do 1 minute.
close, so they have a last minute to drink and they have 1 minute.
Okay.
Yes. This slide not moving, shall we? It doesn't move?
In interest of time, we're gonna give you 1 minute to wrap up, and I will try and do a debrief. I know it's fast, but
Okay, there we go. Okay.
And is your mic on, Tanya?
No, but I'm loud.
Oh, okay.
you can put it on just before you.
Okay. Turn it back on again.
So this is your slide and my slide, and then we're done, right?
Yeah, and then we're done.
And then we can do question with this.
Yes, yes.
You want to start?
You can just.
Yep.
I close it?
There's really good stuff happening in the fund there. They have to just say that you share everything and morning tea time.
We good? We good? Okay. I am so sorry, folks. We'll have to stop you in the middle of your conversations. I don't know if we want to quickly, I'm sorry for this seeming a bit rushed because usually these conversations really take time, but I'm wondering if any of the groups wish to share a little bit about what were some of the conversations you're having. And then we're gonna kind of do a bit of debrief in terms of how we respond to this, how we bring that lens to UDL work. And then we'll leave a few minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes for any questions you might have. And then we're kind of like out of here. That kind of a thing. Anything you'd like to share from any of the tables?
Yes,
Yes.
gentleman there, yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, the mic. Oh.
It's on, yeah. Okay, for everyone at home, my name is Matt. I'm from a learning designer and digital learning designer. So we talked about Amir having the issue where it was a tech issue, and we came up with a good thing at the end here is everyone had to use that same tech, everyone in the classroom. So you build empathy straight away. First lesson, we have a problem. okay, let's all see what he wrote, and then we all use it. So there's that creating empathy within the classroom, within the learner, within the teacher, within everything. But also then we pick up on that becomes a conversation that continues along the term or the semester or whatever you're doing. When everyone goes, I've lost the nuance. And, what do you want to say? So that becomes a speaking topic. So it builds the empathetic relationship and understanding as well. So everyone becomes, it becomes, when it happens, everyone knows it. And then straight away, okay, pens down. What do you want to say?
Oh, thank you for sharing. There is a,
I think we need to.
yeah.
Hi, this is a question from online from Caitlin, put in the chat. From an institutional standpoint, when pursuing accessibility services, is there a reason why things need to be disability focused? Is this changing slowly?
Frederic.
So I can talk about that because for 4 years on as McGill, I was trying really hard, and people would say, why do you talk all the time? And I'd have this, elevator pitch and this longer pitch and this faculty council pitch, and from 5 minutes to 2 hours. And it was systematic. I thought the only way I can create this relationship is just go to everywhere I'm invited and say what I can say to reach out and actually create that osmosis. But we are very siloed. So I think we can do it, but it does mean that each of us as an agent of change needs to get out there, make connections that are not natural to them, and engage with that discourse, right? Don't forget there's a lot of folks supporting anti-racism or culturally responsive pedagogy that have never heard of UDL. And if you don't invite them in and talk about it, that fusion is never going to happen. So we have to create those bridges, and we have to do it proactively, intentionally, and it takes a lot of energy, but it's each of our jobs. So institutionally, that would be my answer. If we break the silos, we'll get there, but we are very much comfortable in the silos at the moment. And don't forget the silos goes with money, right? We are siloed because that funding is siloed. So let's break out of that too, right? And start sharing funding envelope, things like this. Yeah.
I know we're getting the signal to go. I would like to share as we're responding to this, just a couple of things for us to think about. We talk at the beginning about actively checking our biases and our prejudices in terms of how we engage with students. There is a tendency to see Black and Brown students as intellectually disabled. Yet at the same time, there is this perception that you as for Black folks in Black bodies, that you are strong, you don't have accessibility or disability needs. And so there is a lot of tension and dichotomy in that in terms of how we perceive. And in conversations with Black folks, I remember attending a conference that was focusing on Black disability needs and rights, where they're usually very hesitant to ask for support or help, because often they're coming from homes where they're like, you're already marginalized. Don't you dare go show any weaknesses in a system that is going to further marginalize you, right? And so those are some of the things that we need to be thinking about, that we talk about that double marginalization and how that might impact how folks seek help. There's also a lot in terms of making sure when we are bringing people into the fold, we're intentional about it. And it doesn't seem like a side note thing. I'll bring a little bit of this and a little bit, because for you to see that I'm trying, but for you to actually make the work, do the work, and be intentional in terms of how we support people and be flexible. And there's one last thing I want to leave, and it comes from some work from Simmons and a group of researchers who are looking at how do we integrate anti-racist practices, whatever the field is that we're in, whether it's UDL or other fields. And it says, first and foremost, build your self-awareness. What do your students need? What do you know about your students? How do you support them in a genuine way wherein you understand who they are? And then they said, after you've done that, you have to start thinking about racism, ideological acknowledgement. You have to acknowledge it exists. We tend to shy away from it. And so because we don't acknowledge it, we do not address it. It's something for us to leave. I know, I'm coming. It said, teach representatively. Teach representatively, where you're considering your students are coming in with diverse needs, and you're doing things, whether if you're not teaching in services that show them that you see them. Students talk about not being seen. Make sure you're seeing who they are. Moving away from this homogeneous ways of seeing people, and speak about race. Not every field.
So I'm going to put the slide up, and I'm just going to talk. Yes. This was a recap from the accessibility disability side. Just one tiny thing is, if you are thinking that UDL is fully taking in student voice and agency, it's not. We know that, right? It's still teacher-led. And if those teachers don't have an understanding of race, well, the whole of the redesign process is going to also not take those experiences into account, right? So let's break this as well. And obviously there's the problems with accessibility, everything we've discussed so far, but even the very redesign process, it is still teacher-centric, right? So we've got to break out of that and actually involve the voices of others. There's interesting word coming out of VOCAD from the Inclusive Design Center that said, if we're not ethnographic and we're not curious about people's experiences, we can't redesign inclusively. We can only understand what works for us. We can't understand what works for others. So that goes hand in hand with connecting with these experiences of racialized folks.
And we take a bow.
Thank you, Tanya and Frederic. Thank you very much. We are almost on time. So thank you very much for your presentation and all the provocation around it and all the discussion online, Zoomies, and also in the room.